And we'll just wait a minute or two to get started. But like I said, a lot of people are also planning on watching this at a different time. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation that will be made by Archita Tandon, a PhD scholar in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Delhi. And if you have any questions at any point in the presentation, feel free to type it into the Q&A, and Archita will handle questions at the end as they come in. So the title of Archita's talk is Channeling Doxa as Recuperation, Stories that a Medical Anthropologist in Making Should Hear. And I'm now just going to briefly introduce her as well. Archita Tandon is a research scholar from the Department of Anthropology, University of Delhi. She has actively indulged herself as a medical anthropologist with a special focus on maternal health. She is going to present a narrative based on her master's dissertation on the idea of postnatal recuperation among the Kashmiri Muslim women of Doda, Jammu and Kashmir, India. It is interesting to note through the study that in the times where medicalisation runs as paramount globally, there stands a binary opposite of it, where women think there isn't a need for recuperation at all. It is doxa versus medicalisation. So thank you for joining us today, Archita, and feel free to start your presentation.
Thank you so much, Preeti, ma'am. So that's a great introduction, by the way. And so as the title of my presentation reads, Channeling Doxa is Recuperation, Stories that a Medical Anthropologist in Making Should Hear. So basically, this study is a result of a master's dissertation, which was carried out during the pandemic, in a hope to understand that how women locally conceptualize the meaning of postnatal recuperation. We've heard a lot about how Van Genep and other philosophers, they have talked about motherhood being in the jurisdiction of rites of passage, where women move into their new social role through a liminal stage. And this liminal stage is the active period that the women follow immediately after the childbirth, where they take a frame of time just to get the hang of their current social situation. Women have several roles in society, out of which motherhood is one of the most anticipated roles as per the Indian culture, Indian tradition. Obviously, now things are changing with time, but the place where I have conducted this fieldwork is a rural village in Jammu and Kashmir. Jammu and Kashmir, everyone knows, is a North Indian part of India. And within that North Indian part, Doda is a very small district where predominantly the population is Muslim women, Muslim population, and of course Muslim women, and the other population is Sarazi speaking Hindus. So the study is carried out amongst them, and I would like to begin with it. Okay, so here's an excerpt that I had recorded when I was talking to these women. And so these are Muslim women, and Islam is a pro-natal society. So I am a Hindu woman. So as a researcher, my reflexivity was to completely put myself out of context when I was talking to them. So as in a neutral position, I casually asked them, what are the commandments in your religion that makes you believe that, okay, you can do this, you can go on with another birth. And the women really meant that producing offsprings is a gift of God. Being able to give birth is what is required for running of this society. And I was not surprised, because we've all read this, we've all heard this, how the world runs. It's the women who produce children, the legacies move on. But there was a sudden hint in their voice, which kept them very skeptic about how the expectations from women are never ending. So basically, even in the zone of their liminality, where the women actually look upon to take another new responsibility, which is of being a mother, how during that time also they're occupied with thoughts which are actually thoughts of being a woman, where in this society the women are actually given a period of 40 days to just rest and not indulge themselves actively into the household work. And it is the other members of the family who come to fore, who help them out in the whole process, so that they think women can make up the time that their body has given physically to the process of childbirth, and 40 days are enough. But the women constantly, as you can read here, it says during those days as well, it's the mother, only the mother, who wakes up the whole night with the baby, feeds the baby. Yes, the husband and the other relatives, they often come to hold the child, play with the baby, and the job is done. It is actually the women who have to take care of the child throughout. And 40 days which have been commanded to them through their community, through the elders in the society, only thinking of how the physical repair is needed. But the actual aspect of recuperation, which the society only relates to physiological processes coming back to cycle, which is essentially related to the post-birth bleeding, lochia, which we call generally. I'll move forward. So postnatal recuperation means coming back to your original role, as we socially describe it. So marriages in India come with a baby deal. Most of the marriage scenarios are arranged marriage setups. Some of them are love marriage setups. And especially in a Muslim society, a Sunni Muslim society, love marriage is something which is not very much prevalent in their society. Cross cousin marriages are the marriages that the people follow, and they are also not the marriages where the couple knows each other for a long time. It's just that they are arranged in a setup, and thereby the woman originally starts from a journey where she's not mentally prepared to accept the fact that now their lives have changed. And as soon as they get married, the expectations from them to have a baby starts. So in this study, the youngest female that I interviewed was 20-year-old, a preemie para, and she just got married the same year. And she didn't even complete a year of her marriage, and she was blessed with a baby. So it was pertinent to understand from women like that, from that standpoint, where we talk about reproductive justice and we talk about the rights and the norms that come before it. But talking about recuperation in this society, is it what that recuperation is only settled to the fact that they have to be given a secluded environment, a diet, and some bed rest? Is it where the recuperation ends? And what is actually what that women think about it? Is recuperation all about preparing the body for breastfeeding the child and preparing the body to stop bleeding, or is it something more? So as I was talking about the transition, liminality, and new mothers, so as I'm talking about this very, very traditional society, so definitely it is ridden with patriarchal burden. The patriarchal burden not only runs among new mothers through their husband's role or through the male members of the society, but also through the patriarchal bargain that continuously happens from the side of the elderly women in that family. So from the very start of their pregnancies, they are they are told to prepare for labor. They're told to prepare for normal deliveries. In this community, postnatal care or postnatal recuperation is actually attached to the fact that if you undergo a normal delivery, that's where you deserve good care. A cesarean is something that is looked down upon, and if if any cesarean happens, it is as if a woman is not worthy of the care that she gets. So in that scenario, the liminal phase that we're talking about in this case, which happens to be the postnatal recuperative phase, it is something which is ridden with both danger and opportunity in this scenario. So the existing social structure of which these women are a part, how their new role comes into it, and how now they're not transforming into this new role as an individual. That in this patriarchally ridden society, there's a complete set of people who are mediating this transformation into something that they were originally not. This study is both prospective and retrospective in a sense that we have tried to collect even excerpts from their mother-in-laws, like what it was for them and how is it now for these contemporaneous women. So everything gets down to the point that these timings that they have fixed, the standards of recuperation that they have evoked, it's not coming from agency of the women themselves. It is something that is societally existing, and that is something which women just acquire in this process of transformation. So I'll talk a bit about my methodology. So Doda, I'll talk about Doda first. So Doda is a very distant and mountainous place in the Jammu region of J&K, India. So that place has some issues with internet, and sometimes the network connection is not really good. And India, during the pandemic, the second wave, India was in a complete lockdown. So it was not possible for me to travel back home. I am basically a native of that place. So I had to collect data through telephonic calls. Even WhatsApp or Google Meet or Zoom wasn't possible because of these constraints. So I have friends who work there in Doda. So through them, I snowballed among the women, and I gathered quite a number of women, and I spoke to them for over 65 days. I spoke with 15 women, and they were completely telephonic interviews, and the calls and the ice breaking and the rapport took time, like at least 2-3 calls with each woman. And then we used to frequently talk, and sometimes we even used to exchange messages. So basically, the data that was found out, it was coded sequentially, because I use IPA for my analysis and the Smith's way of IPA. So basically IPA is interpretative phenomenological analysis. Now I wanted to connect, because the experiences were so similar sounding, that it was similar to how grounded these facts were among these women. So, as Sartre or Ponti suggests, phenomenology is something that runs inter-effectively among women. It is how these women collectively felt as mothers in this society. So, postnatal period, or the way they used to recuperate during the postnatal time, it was like a distributed experience. So anthropology of experience, in the sense that this distributed experience ran as an actor among this society, that how this experience was something which was mediating these women to transform, and not the women's agency of their own to make sense of this experience. That was something which was very unique in this study, which I was not anticipating. I thought, okay, there are general, like, I want to bring my own reflexive self as well, because I am also human and I am not out of biases. So I want to be very honest with it. So when I thought that I am a Hindu and they are Muslims, so and pregnancy happens everywhere, childbirth happen everywhere, recuperation happens everywhere. So in our community, there's a very strict sense of recuperation that runs, which is in the sense of purity and pollution through the blood, the menstrual vaginal blood that comes. In their community, the processes were not rigid as such in the sense of purity, but there was a marked sense of this societal expectation from women that was expected, which was very, very rigid in this community. So, this distributed experience, thereby, I wanted to document this distributed experience so that it becomes shareable, malleable, and relatable for the other women. So, detailed case studies were taken of these women, and most of these women, all of these women were first time deliveries, and their case studies have been included in this study. And consecutive triangulation of the data was also done by talking to their mother-in-laws in order to understand what were things during that time. So okay, so Nafisa is a term that the Muslim women use for childbirth or motherhood. And nifas, therefore, nifas comes as a term. It's a Muslim term which stands for bleeding. Nifas, postnatal seclusion, and women's voice. So the women, they associated the vaginal bleeding after the childbirth during the postpartum time, the first 30 days, as a sign of weakness in their community. They totally dissociated themselves with the sense of purity, and they made it very clear to me that Islam is a very pro-natal religion. Therefore, it takes complete care of the women of this community. Therefore, bleeding, although it's not unnatural after childbirth, but it is a sign of not being completely well, not being completely in shape. Therefore, the women were secluded. They actually thought that seclusion is a very harsh word. Seclusion sounded to them something like imprisonment or like that, which they made very clear to me that it's not so. Seclusion only for us to physically generate ourselves back. And it wasn't that it was a compulsion for the women to seclusion in the sense that they had to stay in their room, they didn't have to do the household chores, they were not cooking, they were not cleaning, and they were not doing any other stuff. Usually the case is that in case of first time mothers, it is usually the entire families from both the sides, from the mother's side and from her own mother's side and the mother-in-law. Everyone comes together in order to help them, and many women belong to the joint family setup. So the ingrained sense of being there, and also as I spoke about the consanguineal marriages that happen in this community, the mother-in-law and their own mother, they were already related with each other. So that sense of help was really great during this time span of postnatal seclusion, that the women was given a complete time to adjust and accommodate to breastfeeding and to handling the baby. So I came up in my findings, there are several rituals that they follow in the first 40 days. And from those rituals, there are certain themes that have emerged through the coding and the IPA that have been done. So I'll be talking about the rituals first. So let me make it very clear, there aren't any rituals that are completely central to women. So as I was talking about liminality earlier, so liminality is a phase. Liminality is something that enables people to get back into the society from an existence of a transformation. So through that sense, these rituals should be marking the womanhood, something that the mothers should need, but that wasn't the case. Some specific rituals were akika, tehneek, takbir. These were the rituals which were all done for the baby. So as it's a pronatal society, so answering the god, like the god answering their prayers in form of the baby, it had to be immediately thanked. So immediately after the childbirth, an elder member, a male elder member of the family, uh, has to come to visit in the hospitals, no matter it's a normal delivery or CSAC, and they have to chew a very small piece of date and almost make it semi-liquid and give it to the baby facing the Makkah side. Makkah is a very, very religious place for this community. So facing the Makkah side, they whisper the words of Allah's goodness into the child and bring that child back into this reality from the womb. This is the first ritual that happens, which is called tehneek and takbir. Eventually, after the women is brought back into the house, so the 15 women I spoke to, first time deliveries, they all delivered normally. And so that's also a very important aspect of these rituals, and how they are, from the very beginning they're told to just prepare themselves for the normal deliveries, and they just know it by their heart, and they have told me that they just know it that they're going to make it. They don't fear it, because that's how it has to happen. So uh, even when they reach the dispensaries or hospitals, the doctors attending them, they give them full time. They give them time till all the stages of labor coming to life, and the original delivery happening after. There is no induction, there is nothing as such. In case, if the case is very, very severe, they do go for it. But in those scenarios, these rituals are curtailed because they think that the child is brought into this world before time, and they take complete 40 days for both the child and the mother to get back into this society. Now, understanding these scenarios is very important, because whenever there are any policy directives or any initiatives, so I would say midwifery model, which still runs on the wait and see approach, is very well functional in their community, which we might not found in the urban melange of rest of the India. So when the policies come out, they are centrally in a very general aspect. So this anthropological intersectionality is very important to understand that what is that an actual community follows. And the place I'm talking about is a very small place with people having all interconnected relationships. So, moving on from this, there's a major ritual that happens after 40 days of the childbirth, which is called akika, which means sacrificing sheep or goats after the childbirth to mark a feast, which declares that officially the woman and the child have been brought back into the society, and now they're up for their normal integration, socialization, negotiation as per their genders, definitely not ruling that out. And this gendered aspect is even running very closely with akika. So the term akika means deliverance to the god. So if it's a boy, there are two sheep that are sacrificed, and if it's a girl, there's only one sheep that is sacrificed. So asking, I was very curious to know, like, why this, like, why not, why can't you do it same for both of them? So they replied to me very casually that women have to be married off to another person's house for whom already two sheep have been sacrificed. So women are just meant to adjust in someone else's house. So in India, like, women after marriage, it's the woman who moves to the man's house. So it's like not a neo-local pattern, but a patrilocal arrangement where woman moves to the groom's father's house in most cases. So, and so basically the gender norm So hence from here I'm building up the doxa, that how the doxa comes into play. So these rituals essentially mark a differentiation of these children, not mothers, of course, into this scenario. Now, themes, what women think of recuperation. As I've been constantly mentioning, and as also how Preeti mentioned in my introduction, where I say it's doxa versus medicalisation. So basically, this is a complete alternate narrative of recuperation. Nowadays, if we see Instagram or any other social media, there are women from urban corporate setups. They come up and share their own experience of life after childbirth, how they and their husband, they're dividing duties as parents, and they are working together to raise a baby without the interference of any mother-in-law, mother, and how they face problems in daily life, which is very, very different from the existing stereotypes narratives. This is the common narrative that is running around, where women do come out and open up about postpartum depression, stress, anxiety. I constantly kept asking these women about these questions, and they just, it's not that they didn't want to answer or they didn't know. They knew what depression is, they knew what stress is, they knew what anxiety is, but they didn't know what it is like when it comes from childbirth. And through constant probing, they have mentioned to me the instances where they are completely delusional, or they're completely upset. In some scenarios, they have even thought of leaving the house, they've even thought of going out, but they don't want to accept it as a reality of how this gendered expectation is actually putting them into this kind of stress, or in terms if we call postpartum depression or something. The people are unknown to this. Why? Because of the existing unquestioned truth of the society, which is the bone of the study, that is doxa. So doxa is a term, I'll move to the next slide first. So doxa is a term that is coined by Pierre Bourdieu. So Bourdieu, he is a postmodern philosophist. So Bourdieu has often questioned the paradigms of the societal functioning in terms of how there are some things which are taken fact. There are unquestioned truths which are taken for granted, which just naturally happen in the society and the social world since a very long time is self-evident of these factors. Like if we talk about gender norms, if we talk about gender stereotypes, if we talk about gender expectations, they're all part of doxa. Like in India, there's a concept of ghar jamai, and this is a concept in this community as well. Ghar jamai means house husband. Like as I already told, as a woman goes to a patrilocal residence and a man doesn't come to a matrilocal residence. So if this happens, this is against the doxa, and so is the case with these women who come and question me in turn that what is your research all about? Why do women need to recuperate about something that is so natural as childbirth, that the women are born to do? Women are born to make babies, give birth. So why would anyone in this world feel depressed about it? Why should anyone feel depressed? So their answer to all the problems, all of the instances that I mentioned, that they were crying, they wanted to leave, it was all coming down to one fact that was keeping them down mellow, that I am a woman and I have to. So basically, for these women, being a woman was the recuperation. That was the postnatal recuperation for them, which was keeping them moving throughout this time, no matter how hard it was for them. So now coming back to the alternative narrative of recuperation. So all the points that I mentioned here were the major themes that came out: stereotypes, expectation, and reality. The women classically believed in this doxa, and So there's a very classic instance that I want to mention. So one of the women, she delivered a baby girl, and in the same house, there was her sister-in-law. She delivered a baby boy, and this woman tells me that the baby girl kept crying the whole time in the night, and she was not being able to adjust in this new life of out of womb, the out of womb life. And it all came down to me because my mother-in-law told me that I am the one who doesn't take care of the child, and the sister-in-law is very good at taking care of the child. So this woman ultimately started to brace herself up. She started to wake up extremely early. She didn't used to sleep well. She used to eat a lot just to make sure that she has enough to feed the baby. And ultimately, it took her to a reality that she had not seen before. This made her very sick. This made her sick to a point that she actually had to give up on taking care of her own child because she was bedridden with lot of weakness, and she couldn't even move for 2 days. This is what she tells me. And being very concerned about her situation, I just asked her that, so even now you don't think that you need to recuperate, and you're taking this stereotype of being a mother and being all alone, hands on the child, too harsh for yourself, and this gendered expectation from you is pulling you down. She told me that that's what she's supposed to do. And now you would question me that, were they literate, were they working or something? Most of these women that I spoke to, they were all literate. Some even had done masters, and they were, but all of them were jobless. And it's not that they were jobless because of circumstance. They didn't want to do the jobs because of this existing doxa that women should bear children first. And this was the major narrative that was running, that once the children are of the age 6 7, after that a woman should look for job, because the early ages for a child is very crucial for the development, and the mother has to be there. So the man and woman social role was very, very clear in this society. So coming to the fourth narrative of recuperation, joint family was constantly not in synance with this first aspect, which was about stereotype, expectation, and reality, because they had initially thought of this expectation to run as a fact of seclusion where everyone was coming to help them. It eventually faded. The joint family aspect faded after a time, and it all came down to the woman alone to take care of the child. The elder women of the family were a very, very important part of this study. So they spoke about a lot of traditional medicine, ethno medicine, that still runs in their community, and that's a very, very important part of their physical recuperation. And also they spoke about how emotional and mental well-being was closely associated with the kind of food they had. And interestingly, the women also spoke about the fact that how seasons affect the recuperation. So if a baby is born in winters and a woman runs on the floor without any slippers or socks, so the baby will catch cold. And many women have told me that the baby actually catches cold, and it is the woman who's given the medicine and not the baby, so that the baby gets cured. And to my surprise, the women also said the baby did get cured. They also mentioned that they don't know the science behind this, but in many cases this has worked. They mentioned that when the baby used to catch cold, the mother-in-law would put mustard oil, a little bit mustard oil in their nostrils, and would ask them to sleep. And when they used to wake up, the baby was all fine. In some instances, it was told that how the diarrhea, constipation, and other things can be kept out. If it's kept out of the woman's body, it's kept out of the child's body. So this was a very interesting part. So there's a local herb which is called hand. So it's like carom seeds. It's like, it tastes like carom seeds in a leafy form. So they prepare that meal and they have it, and that is something that they are told to consume continuously for 40 days. And the women have reported that even if they miss one day of it, the baby develops fever. So the things that have been running down traditionally in this community are still carried on and very much believed in. So Islam also, after my subsequent research, I looked upon this fact that why was this drink being given to women? So the bleeding after the childbirth is also considered as impure in Islamic texts, and the menstrual blood also comes into this category, which is called hairs. So the women drank this to avoid a very important ritualistic practice in Islam, which was ghusl. So ghusl is a systematic washing of the body that has to be followed completely after any form of vaginal bleeding, and even after getting intimate with your partner. So for 40 days, a seclusion is extremely related to the sense that they cannot get intimate with the partner. And that's where the term seclusion comes, and that's where the idea of rest associates. So in ghusl, they had to begin from the from the left part of their body. The whole left part had to be washed first, and then coming to the right part. And it was believed that if women don't follow the right course of ghusl and do ghusl before time, it would cause problems to them in conception of another child. And that's where the idea of pronatal and the God's planning came into being. And in case the women missed this aspect, there was this drink, which was a hunt syrup kind of a thing, which was given to these women as a drink to ask for their acquittal from any kind of sin that they might have committed knowingly or unknowingly. Husbands show less but do more. So in the arranged marriage setup, being classically patriarchal, uh, it was not believed that it's very cool or it's very nice on part of husbands to openly show that care or openly come out and ask their wives to rest or recuperate. It was often that the husbands used to come to their wives when everyone else was asleep and it was night, and they would just come, look at the baby, play with it. So the bond with the husband during these 30 days weakened according to the women, and that was something which was emotionally and mentally hampering the women. And they clearly mentioned that the husband's support was very important for the term that I was constantly using in front of them, recuperation. They had a lot of expectations from their husband because they felt that none of the other female members, although they were all known with their situation that they were facing right now, none of them could help the way the husbands could. And the postnatal seclusion, the 40 days, eventually came to the point that a woman was not physically ready to get back into that cycle of intimacy again. So this break had to be given, and husbands didn't used to sleep together with the wife, they would just pay visits to them and would go. So this lack of intimacy, not only in form of sexual intimacy but any other form of intimacy, was very very hampering to these women. So even very less the husbands would do would act as something recuperative for these women, which is so unlikely of the urban scenarios we see these days. Another aspect of recuperation is that all the pregnancies are different, which I mentioned. So with pregnancies, the women mean the number of the pregnancy and the type of the pregnancy and the type of delivery, of course. Number of pregnancies. So they said that all of the information which we are giving to you, it's very central to the first delivery, to the first timer. As you keep on adding the number of children you've produced, this all keeps dwindling. Then there are no compulsions on you to seclude yourself. Then there's only compulsion to seclude yourself from sexual intimacy. Rest, when you have a family to feed, when you will have other children to feed, you have to get up from the bed, that the rest period is going to decline. So they were narrating incidents and scenarios of women of their age who had given birth to more than one child, and they were kind of scared to go into that phase because they were like this. So they considered this treatment as special, and they were like this special treatment would go away from us. And um, when it came to the type of delivery, which, as I already mentioned, that they were not into C sections, and even the local dispensaries or programs that the Indian government runs through the midwifery approaches, which is Janani Suraksha Yojana, through auxiliary nurses help. So they were all very very clear about the community, and they never pushed for any C-sec delivery. So it was often the normal delivery. In case anyone would have a C-sec delivery, this care period would rise, and it would be considered abnormal. And when any woman, and no woman wanted to fall into that scape of giving birth in an abnormal understanding of this socio-cultural context. So the abnormality lay in the parts that how they were treated. So none of the women I spoke to had a C-section, sorry. So one of the women, her sister, she had a C-section, and uh, so the woman, she just started her narrative by telling me that I was praying all the time to Allah that I don't want to have the delivery the way my sister had. It made me very curious, and they were like, she was not cared very very nicely. It's just that her rest period was elongated. So after C-section, the the people actually don't know how to fit the traditions and rituals, because uh, the stitches are there, a woman has to stay longer in the hospital. So the whole maths of doing the ritual when and how, it changes, and this affects the care. This affects how the family looks at the woman and how the care has to be given. So again, the doxa of giving birth normally, and if not normally, it's going to cause a problem. So that's where you get the care, and that's where the recuperation led in this scenario. So the other part of my title, which says stories that the medical anthropologist in making should hear, I make this a part of my title because we are in a world where neutrality is rife, and being reflexive on top of it is very very important. Hearing stories from a place which is still there in time, which is still synchronically existing in a traditional time, is very important to bring to the fore the ideas and their preservation. As an anthropologist, it is our duty to protect their beliefs, their ideologies, and not judging them of what they do and how they do, because that's all about reproductive justice, only to a point when it does not hamper someone's life. So, who is there to make this choice for? Especially, it has to be the women and their agency. But in this case, it is their socio-cultural context. We don't know how long is it going to take to change, or to give this agency to the women themselves, or when is the realization going to come. But definitely that realization and that polyvocality is going to settle with the women. But till the time it is their belief, it is very well respected, even in their community, even in their hospital settings. And of course, after being a part of this study, they did look back upon how the recuperation should have been. Thank you so much for patiently listening to me. And I think I've finished it before time, but that's what I had to say about this study.
Thank you. That was a very interesting presentation. If anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in to the Q&A box. I do have a question while waiting. I'm curious about whether any of the women discussed, things changing in modern times, since even though they are somewhat isolated, I'm guessing at least younger generations do have some people who actually leave those areas and likely bring back some of the more urban ideas with them when they visit home.
So you'd be surprised to know that many of these women's husbands were actually living in an urban area. And these women used to migrate there for some time and then come back to their paternal house. So I asked them, when you go there and when you look at how the nursing homes are there, how women undergo C-sections, doesn't that make you think that, okay, you also have a painless option, like they also don't use epidurals and other things? To this, the women told me that there are women, it's not that all women follow this doxa. There are some women, and they just call them rebels. And they were like, with this, the recuperation changes. So the women who are the actors of the study, the whose distributed experience I'm talking about, are the ones for whom their existing familial and social values are at core. So they consider those urban women bringing this change in their society as people who are putting their norms in danger. So basically, they are scared of this change. And they just say that we don't judge anyone, but this is not right. So this is the kind of perception they have right now. And and they think that it's very modern. It's very modern to do this. But they also mention that it will change with time. There will be people who will change with time. To this, I asked them that, what if you have a daughter, what do you plan for her? What do you think, that she should go through all this pain, or should there be another option for her? To this, they definitely reply that they should have options. So that's where the change is, and that's where the people who go outside, who bring these new ideas to them, are giving them this idea that, okay, this is also a way that things can happen. I hope it answers your question.
Absolutely, it was very interesting. I'm curious to know a little bit more about when you were touching on having later pregnancies, after you already have young children. So is that a part of the cultural tradition that the support you get from others declines with later children? Or is that just something that's like practical that has happened?
That's something practical, I would say. So they were like, the elder women thing, now you're yourself experienced first. And secondly, they mentioned that the children, so the pregnancies are not very, like, they're not very well planned in a very longitudinal manner. So the gap between the children is not huge. So they're like, there are young children who don't want to go away from their mother for a very long period of time. So it's very practical for these mothers to just be very hands on and cut down on their rest period and just get into the kitchen, make food, because they have a family to feed. This is what they think. So it's very practical.
Makes sense. Just curious, do most of these women have home births, or do they go to the hospital for a couple of days?
They don't go to hospitals for a couple of days. There are not home births right now. None of these women had a home birth. They all had normal deliveries at a local dispensary, but their mother-in-laws, they all had home births. So that midwifery culture, it's not very much prevalent, but it does happen. So the local dai is a term which is given to midwife. So they are still revered members in their community, and they accompany these women to the dispensaries with the auxiliary nurses and all, and that's how it happens nowadays. So they have actually taken the whole setup to the hospital.
Okay. And they usually just stay until
Yeah.
the delivery is over, or?
Yeah, they stay, uh, maximum the women stayed in this context, they stayed for over a day, that's all, and they come back home because they have to follow all those rituals as well.
Mhm. And generally, is any extended family around to help with the older children when they're gone for at least a day?
Yeah. There are women who are there, and also, as I mentioned, they're consanguineous families, so they have a very deep connection. The wife's side and the husband side are very well connected together, so there are family members to help. There are lots of women, elderly women, who are at the hospital as well, which so yeah, I forgot to mention. So as per the Indian rules, so there's a program called Janani Suraksha Yojana, which allows you to take one birth companion for birth during the birth. So there are fights in the family who to take. So the mother-in-law, who might be the sister of their own mother, khala they call them in their own language. So they're often this conundrum to who to take, your own mother or your mother-in-law. So there are fights because of this, so they choose not to take anyone. So then everyone else back at home.
That's interesting. Wonderful. Does anyone else have any questions? Like I mentioned, feel free to put them in the Q&A box. I do have one more question. Just based on the types of conversations you were having, and you mentioned that they wanted ideally more choice for their own daughters compared to what they felt they had. Do you feel like, in 25 years, things are going to be very different, even in these more rural communities?
I think they'll be very different from what they are now. And also, the women who migrate permanently from the area, they are changed and they have accepted the change. It's just that the idea of family has gone a bit away, but that burden of doxa still stays with them. That expectation still stays.
Yeah, that makes sense. Those, I guess, cultural expectations, even though they
Cultural
represented slightly differently with time, the
Hmm.
core of them often remains for a long time.
Right.
Great, thank you so much. If nobody
Thank
else has
you.
any questions, this would be a great time for us to end this presentation and enjoy the future presentations today. And as all of you know, this presentation, as well as all the others associated with the conference, are going to be available to view after the conference as well. The videos will be available to you. Thank you all, and thank you, Archita, in particular, for that fascinating presentation.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure to be a part of this. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Enjoy the other conference presentations.
Very much excited to be a part of it.
Exactly. The next one starts in just 5 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too.